Bulavinaka, bonjour, and a very warm welcome to the Pacific Way, bringing you stories that matter to Pacific people. I am Patricia Naisara, your special guest host for this season. This year, the Pacific Way celebrates its 25th anniversary since first hitting the airwaves in 1995. To celebrate this milestone, we will be showcasing some of the many stories that capture the changing lives of our Pacific people and how they are persevering through common challenges. In the face of the global pandemic, we're also celebrating the importance and power of the Pacific's community spirit, which remains an essential part of our past, present, and future. As you're aware, the Festival of Pacific Arts, which was set to take place in Hawaii this year, has been moved to 2024. But while the festival may have been delayed, the Pacific Way will continue to celebrate our region's cultures and traditions. This season, we will take you down memory lane with performances from previous Festival of Pacific Arts and the Melanesian Arts Festival. But today, we begin our journey on the island nation of Tokelau. After years of research and investigations, millions of liters of underground water has been discovered, bringing relief to the people of Tokelau.
Tokelau is one of the smallest and most remote nations in the world, consisting of 3 coral atolls in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. With an average population of just 1,200 residents, life on Tokelau is immersed in religion and traditional customs, with reliance on fish and coconut as a staple diet.
I'd say Tokelau is very unique, very small in population-wise. I think with our atoll, it's probably under 500 people. We don't have any tourists. And that's probably because we're very unknown. You probably just see that Tokelau on a map is just a dot. The people here are very religious. We have 3 different religions in Tokelau as a whole, but here in Atahu we're all, our religion here is LMS. Very friendly, I'd like to say, very shy.
There is no airport in Tokelau, and the only way to get to the island is from Apia, Samoa by ship. The government-run vessel provides passenger and cargo services to and from Apia every 2 weeks, and the journey can take up to 36 hours each way. This also provides a time to prepare for the work ahead.
To go to Tokelau, you have to plan for the longest time to go to Tokelau because you have to travel by boat, and the community is a really unique cultural governance structure in Tokelau. Everything goes there. Not only like in most countries in the Pacific, you have to go through the foreign affairs and then into the country. In Tokelau, you have to go through also up to the elders of the islands to give you approval for you guys to come in. So it's a long process. You need a good time to prepare for a trip to Tokelau.
Tokelau is dependent on rainwater as its sole source of water, and most houses and buildings are fitted with a rainwater catchment and storage system. It has been a practice for years.
As we all know, and as God's will would have it, we do not have rivers as other nations do. For example, like Samoa, our closest neighbor. However, as I remember, no one's life was at risk from thirst, because as you know, there was still water for drinking as well as plenty of coconuts on this island. Therefore, water is something that is essential not only for our sustenance, but also for the other daily activities as I had mentioned before. It is required for cooking. If there is no water, there would not be any of those things, and all those would be on pause. Laundry would not be done. However, the majority of families here or within these households have at least 8 to 13 members living in them. And so if there is no water, those families would suffer from the lack of it, which also means that the message from that is clear. Water is a vital part of life for the Tokelauan people.
However, a prolonged drought in 2011 took a heavy toll on the people and the island's limited resources.
We had a drought here in 2011, months with no rain. And just the little water we had in our tanks, we were very careful with the water that we had. Some days we actually just had to go to the sea, shower, come back, and just a few cups of water just to wash all the salt water off. The drinking water we had in the tanks, you could actually tell that it wasn't fresh. We had to boil that. We actually had to go as far as getting coconuts from Samoa. So we were able to give our pigs food, because our coconut trees, there was nothing there. There was no coconuts on the coconut trees. Even the breadfruits was hardly there, and that was because there was no water, no rain. So it wasn't a good experience.
While short-term solutions were implemented through installation of tanks for increased water capacity, more was needed to ensure long-term sustainable water supply for the people of Tokelau. Through the Pacific Community's Strengthening Water Security of Vulnerable Island States program, and with funding support from MFAT, the Government of New Zealand, local authorities and communities in Tokelau were engaged to map out water security plans.
SPC has just completed a consultation on the villages where everyone were involved, as a stakeholder. Each stakeholders on Tokelau were involved in developing a water policy and sanitation for Tokelau. And this work has already been done by a consultant commissioned by Tokelau and SPC, and therefore it's in a draft now. And this piece of document will help Tokelau, track the relevant funding to improve water challenges in Tokelau.
In late 2019, SPC conducted surveys using ground-penetrating radar equipment to detect sources of fresh underground water in all 3 atolls in Tokelau. The result? Millions of liters of fresh underground water sources have been identified.
It's good news that we have underground water currently, on all the 3 islands of Tokelau. On my island, where I come from, there is sign of fresh water, underground water. Comes to more than 90 million liters of underground fresh water. It's very comforting to know that there is water storage underneath our, the ground in Tokelau. And, with that piece of document, the water policy, then we can ask the funders to, to bring this water up to the surface whenever we need it in terms of droughts and, for sanitation purposes. Yeah.
Under the program, in addition to development of the water and sanitation policy and action plan, SPC also conducted field surveys and installed new rain gauges on all 3 atolls.
We managed to do 3 things in one trip. Our team went down to do groundwater assessment. We managed to install rain gauges. For about almost 20 years, Tokelau hasn't had a record of rainfall data. So they were so pleased to have us install rain gauges in each of the islands.
Work is now being undertaken by SPC and the government of Tokelau in identifying groundwater potential, and the next step is to explore ways of sustainably extracting the underground water.
Sustainably is the word. We don't want to bring all the water underneath the ground to the top, to the surface. Therefore, I think it's safer, much safer if we can store it where it is. And with that piece of document I was talking about, the water policy and sanitation policy, we can have funding, to bring up this water for sanitation use, and maybe in future for treatment, for drinking.
Water management and sanitation works are being conducted on the atolls, with renewed hope amongst the people of Tokelau that their water problems would soon be a thing of the past.
Welcome back. You're watching The Pacific Way. The importance of agriculture for the long-term food security in the Pacific has never been more evident. One way we have celebrated agriculture is through the establishment of the Pacific Week of Agriculture. The inaugural event was held in Vanuatu in 2018.
Pacific Islands people have thrived by surviving from the land and the seas for centuries. Traditional farming practices guaranteed daily supply of nutritious fruits and vegetables, and sufficient proteins were available from the sea and livestock. Over the decades, agriculture has become even more important, if not the most important sector for several Pacific Island nations. However, the entire Pacific region is now faced with an increasing threat of long-term food security. Pacific Island nations and territories are highly prone to natural disasters, especially cyclones, droughts and flooding, which have become even more severe due to the increasing impacts of climate change. In a collaborative effort to address food security throughout the region, the first ever Pacific Week of Agriculture was hosted by the government of Vanuatu in October 2017, in partnership with the Pacific Community, SPC, and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. This marked a vital step towards a regional approach for sustainable food security and sustainable agriculture industry.
This occasion is very important for our farmers as well as other partners to showcase some of their products and produce that they are working with in relation to the overall theme of the Pacific of Agriculture, which is crops. It talks about culture, resilient, opportunity, products, and sustainability. This is very significant for Vanuatu because most of our farmers take this opportunity to meet other farmers, exchange knowledge, and see opportunities for market.
The 3 days of agricultural display at Vanuatu's Independence Park in Port Vila sought to increase awareness on traditional foods and crops for sustainable food security, but more importantly, show how, through technical assistance and innovative use of local resources, Pacific Islanders can ensure sufficient food supply even through the toughest of climatic conditions.
In general, the displays covers the whole value chain, let's say in agriculture, starting from the production, processing, and value adding, and ends with the marketing of all the products. So there are a lot of information in terms of production, how to plant crops, to improve quality, control pest and disease, as well as how to process value add that meets the requirements or standards of the market.
The inaugural Pacific Week of Agriculture was held in conjunction with a meeting of the department heads of agriculture, forests and fisheries, and the Pacific Ministers for Agriculture, Forests and Fisheries after a lapse of 5 years. The event was jointly hosted and co-chaired by the Pacific Community, or SPC, and the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO. The Deputy Director General, FAO, says the Pacific region, specifically the small island developing states, are a priority for the FAO.
And we are very much touched by the needs, by all the problems facing by this region, whereby they have covered destruction, recovering, and we can see that all the resources they can put in development are put in the recovering effects from the climate change events.
FAO has previously collaborated with SPC's Land Resource Division, or LRD, to assist several island nations with issues surrounding food security.
FAO is known for all its normative regulatory work. This is the organization that creates advocacy, that makes people aware that there are key issues that have to be addressed. FAO is not a donor. They rely first of all on other donors to make sure that they can implement programs.
On the final day of the week-long event, the Pacific Ministers converged at Iririki Island Resort, the final venue for the event. The Pacific Ministers were accorded a traditional welcome ceremony by the government of Vanuatu as a symbol of the importance of the Pacific Week of Agriculture. This provided an opportunity to openly discuss food security issues impacting their countries and seek guidance on sustainable solutions. Leaders highlighted that their problems, while similar, need country-specific solutions, keeping in mind the unique environments of small atoll states and territories. Apart from climate change and the impact of natural disasters, disease and pest control were issues also of serious concern across the Pacific. Supporting resilient agriculture in the Pacific is a priority for both SPC and FAO. With the complementary nature of each organization's work evident, an agreement to build on this partnership and engage in more collaborative efforts was seen as an important and positive development for the region.
We decided to work even closer than we are working now. In some areas like crop, you know that the region faces several problems linked to climate change. To have varieties being climate sensitive to drought or to floods, work on the protection of the genetic resources. You know that is an area where SPC is working to have the gene banks to protect the genes of the traditional crops. FAO hosts the Secretariat of the International Crop, and we decided how we can really expand the areas and work in areas of interest of the region.
Chaired by the Deputy Director General of FAO and the Deputy Director General of SPC. This has huge significance for the Pacific region, and it's a message to the world that, look, we are ready jointly to work together on food security in the region.
And that is all we have time for today. We leave you with this performance from the host of the 2024 Festival of Pacific Arts, the Hawaiian delegation performing at the 11th Festival in the Solomon Islands. You can check out all our latest news and videos on the Pacific Community YouTube channel and the Pacific Way Facebook page. Until next week, lukumu and goodbye.
No kane ka papai lo ye Presented our dances that have come from our ancestors. It documents the history of our people, tells the stories of what has happened through the generations. We started traditional performance with dances for our gods. So our first dance was for Kane, our god of water, and it's a welcoming chant. The second hula was for Pele, and Hi'iakuikapolio Pele. Pele is our goddess of volcanoes. She's responsible for making our land.